In this video, we're going to install the Snort open source network intrusion detection software on a Windows computer. We're going to go through the process of downloading the software and the rules that work with Snort, installing and configuring Snort, and quickly testing it to make sure it works. This example is being done on a Windows 7 computer, but the instructions we're going to go through would work equally well on Windows 8 or 8.1. So to get started, we're going to go to the Snort website. That's www.snort.org. And we need to download two things. We need the installer to install the software on Windows, and we need some rules. If we click on Get Started, you can download the installation software from here. You don't want source code because we're not doing Linux, so we'll go to Windows. There's only one file. It's the installer. You click on that, and you save it to your computer. Okay. After you've done that, you can go back up to the top, and we need to get some rules. You have three choices with rules. There's a community rule set, which is free. You can download it any time. It doesn't require you to register or sign in. There's two other versions of the rules. One is called registered. You can see here. You need to have an account with Snort for that, with snort.org for that. It's free. There's also a subscription. That's $30 a year for individuals and a few $100s for businesses. And the subscription gives you the very latest updates to the rules, much like you might have with antivirus rules or something. As soon as something comes out, you'll get it. With registered rules, you have to wait a couple of weeks before you get them. And the community rules are somewhat older in terms of the updates, but all the critical rules are still in there. Any of these rules packages will work, so if you don't want to register for an account, you can just pull the community rule set down. You just click on it, save it to your browser, or save it to your local folder. So when we have the software downloaded, we'll have two things. We've got the Snort installer, and we've got the Snort rules. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to run the installer. You get a pop-up, click yes. You've got a typical license agreement. It's open source software. We say we agree. We're going to stick with the defaults for this demo: Snort, the dynamic modules, the documentation that comes with it. We're going to let it install in the default directory on Windows, which is just Snort off the root for the drive. The extractor runs, the installer runs, and everything's done. We say click, we get a pop-up. It says, by the way, Snort requires WinPCAP, which is a packet capture utility on Windows. Enabled to run, to be able to pull the traffic off the network card, Snort needs this utility. Now, if you already have Wireshark or another program like that installed, you do not need WinPCAP because you already have it. If you don't have it, you can just go ahead and click OK, and you can go and get it. The pop-up says 4.1.1. The most recent version of WinPCAP is actually 4.1.3, but you can go and, if you don't have it, you should go and get that and install it before you go on with Snort. Again, if you have Wireshark or any other network analysis tool on your computer already, you'll already have this driver. So the way that you know that Snort has been installed on Windows is to open up your computer, go to the C drive, and you'll see this directory for Snort. If you open that, you'll see what's in place by default. Bin is where the program works, where the program executable is stored. Doc is where the documentation is stored. ETC is an important folder. That's where our configuration information is going to go. There's some libraries of usable files in here that Snort references. Logs go in this log directory by default, and then there's two different places for rules. Now, the rules are relevant because we're about to put some things into the rules folders. So, aside from the installer, we downloaded a rules package. It's a zip file, so I'm going to open it up. I happen to be using 7-zip, which is a free zip and unzip utility. You can use whatever you prefer. This is a subscriber rule set, but the structure is much the same no matter which of the rule sets you use. And what we're really going to do is just copy some files here. So in the rules folder, we don't need the license file necessarily, but all these rules files that are in here, we're just going to select them all. And I'm going to extract them. To Snort rules. Okay, I'm going to go back up. I want the preprocessor rules. There's only 3 of these. I'm going to extract those. Now there's already some in there, but we're just going to overwrite them because these are the most recent versions because they just came with the new rules package that we have. We're going to ignore the SO rules. That stands for shared object rules. Those don't work so well in Windows, so we're going to ignore those. And then in the etc folder, there's 6 files here that we are going to extract into Snort etc. Those also already exist, but we're going to override them because this is the latest version. So now we've extracted everything we need from the rules package, and we are good to go. So I'm going to close the zip file. I'm going to close the downloads folder. Don't even need snort.org open anymore. At this point, what we have in place in Snort, if you go back to this directory, is if you look in the rules folder, you see there's quite a few rules here. You don't need to worry about those the first time you install it, except this little file that's included called local rules, which is blank right now. There's nothing in it, but this is where you would put your own rules when you choose to write them. So we'll get to that part a little bit later. So the next thing that we're going to do is we have to configure Snort to run on this computer so that it will run properly. So we're going to go to the Snort etc folder, and we're going to edit a file called Snort. It's actually called snort.conf. It's not showing the extension here because that's not the way my system is set up. And you can open it with almost any text editor that you want. I like to use another free open source tool called Notepad++. The reason I like to use that particular application is because it numbers the lines. And when you're running Snort and it gives you errors, it frequently tells you what line of this file they're in, and it's handy to be able to check those. So now I've opened up the Snort configuration file, and we need to make several changes to customize it to run on this computer. So you can see the configuration file is for the version that we're installing, 2972. It's divided into 9 different sections. We're not going to make changes in all of them, but we are going to in some. The very first thing we do in step 1 is we're going to set the home network. Snort uses the idea of your own internal network, which it calls home, and then everything else, which it calls external. So this may vary depending on what you're running. I'm running a typical home network environment, 168. Whether you're 0.1 or 1.1 on your gateway doesn't really matter. If you want all of those addresses to be consider the home network, then you can just use a .16 or /16 at the end of this, and now I've got my home network set up. Now my external network is everything that is not the home network. So I'm going to use the variable that Snort defines for the home network, HomeNet. I'm going to put a $sign in front of it so we reference the variable, and the exclamation point means not. So that now says everything that's not in the home network is going to be considered external. Don't have to do anything with all these other server settings. They're just going to look for these different kinds of services, mail, web servers, database servers, telnet, whatever. It's going to look only on the internal network for those. So there's no changes needed there. This variable here, HTTP ports, allows you to set which of the ones are going to be used for web traffic. There's a very long list of ports that might be used here. You can edit it down if you want, but you certainly don't have to. No other real changes required for ports right here. The next thing we're going to do, though, when we get down to about line 104, is we need to define the directory where the rules are. Especially because we're on Windows, we want full directory paths, so we're going to put the C:\snort in front of this and make sure that the file actually points to the right directory. Now we're not using shared object rules, as I said during the installation, so we're going to comment that out. That means we put a hash symbol in the first space of the line. And then for the preprocessor rule path, we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to change this one to start with Snort, so it goes to the right place. I'm going to do that the same place here. 2 more places where we point to the rules directory for the black and the whitelist, which are used with the reputation preprocessor. So if you choose to use those, it's good to set these paths. And that's it for step 1. Now in step 2, there's a bunch of configuration settings. We're going to leave them all the way that they come, except we're going to enable a log directory. Now you saw when I showed you the directory structure that the default logging directory on Windows is c:/log, so that's what I'm going to set it to, and now we've got that set. Step 3, a bunch more configuration settings that we shouldn't need to change. We're going to go down to step 4, and we've got some paths. We need to, Snort needs to reference something called a dynamic preprocessor. That's where all the different preprocessors that work with Snort are going to live. They are in a Snort library. It starts with c/snort and then there's the lib directory, and I'm going to turn the slash around because we're on Windows, and I'm going to take this backslash off at the end. So that's where the Snort Dynamic Preprocessor is. If you don't remember where that is, you can go back to your directory and you can look here. Look, we've got the library folder, and now we've got two directories, Snort Dynamic Preprocessor, which is the one I just worked with, and I'm about to do Snort Dynamic Engine. So the Dynamic Engine is another file that's referenced by Snort. Turn the path slashes around. Now this is the file name that it would be if it were on Linux, but it's not. sfengine DLL. Again, if you do not remember what that is, you can go here, you can open up Dynamic Engine, and lo and behold, there's the file. We're actually pointing to a file here, so I wanted to make sure that I had that one configured. We're not using the Snort Dynamic Rules as shared object rules, so we're going to comment this third configuration line out by putting a hash sign at the beginning of it. Now we've got preprocessors. Snort has dozens of preprocessors. You can run as many or as few as you like. Quite a few of them are enabled by default. We're going to disable a couple. We're going to disable the inline preprocessor because Snort does not run in inline mode on Windows, so there's no point to leave it enabled. Fragmentation, stream, HTTP inspect, all very important preprocessors depending on the kind of things you're going to do. There's some very specific preprocessors like back orifice. You can leave that on if you like or turn it off. SMTP, there's also IMAP and POP in here. I like to leave the port scan one on. It's off by default, but I'm turning it on. There's a bunch of other ones in here. So I'm basically going to leave all these set to the defaults until I get down to the reputation preprocessor. Now I like to use reputation preprocessor. This is a way to give a list of IP addresses that you consider to be bad. Those would be your blacklist, or that you consider to be good. Those would be your whitelist. So I'm going to enable those. I already set a directory up there. I'm going to change the name here because I don't like Snort's naming convention. They're not really rules files. They're just lists of IP addresses. So I think it's confusing to call them rules files. Now, one thing is very important. If you enable this, these two files have to exist. They have to exist. Right now, they do not exist. So we can go back to our rules directory, and we can create a new file. Okay? I put a comment here. I'm going to say whitelist file, put whitelisted IP addresses here, one per line. I'm not going to put any in here right now, but that's what I'm going to call it. I don't want to save it in etc. I want to save it in rules. This is my whitelist, so I'm going to call it white.list. And now that's saved. Now I'm going to go ahead and just use this same window that I have open to make my blacklist file. Save as. Black.list. Save. Close. Leave that one open. And now if you look here, we have the blacklist file and the whitelist file. So now that they're being referenced, we won't get an error when we try to open up the when we try to run the program. So where were we? We were editing Snort. So we finished with reputation preprocessor. That's all the preprocessors. Now we got output plugins. Now most of these plugins are designed for a platform other than Windows. Some of them don't even work on Windows. Unified 2 is hard to work with. You could use syslog if you want. That's a very popular way to direct output to Windows. I'm not going to use any of these right now because I'm just going to do output to the screen while we're testing. You want to leave these last two lines enabled, classification.config and reference.config. Now in 7, we have a place where Snort points to all the different rules that we have here. Now one of the things I want to do here is I want to change the slashes because we're not running on Linux, we're running on Windows. Snort's actually pretty good about this. It doesn't care very much, but I still like to change them. So in this list, with all these rules files, I'm just going to change the slashes. It's easier to do it with search and replace than it is to type it individually, in my humble opinion. There's quite a few of the rules files. We're just going to leave them all enabled. If you don't want to leave them enabled, you can comment out any of them that you like. Some of them are very platform specific or very software specific, like one for, say, Cold Fusion. If you're not running Cold Fusion, you might not want rules that are designed for Cold Fusion. So I also changed the 3 that were in Step 8. We're keeping all the rules open in Step 7. In Step 8, we have 3 preprocessor rules. I'm going to enable all of those, so I'm going to take away the hash symbol in each of them. We're not using the shared object rules. You'll notice these are all commented out, so I'm going to leave them commented out, and I'm just going to check to make sure threshold.config is in place and enabled. So now I'm going to save my configuration file. I'm going to minimize that, and now we are ready to see if our configuration will run. So to do that, Snort works from the command line. You don't double-click on it even on Windows. So I am going to open up a command shell. Now when you do this, it's important to open it and run as administrator, not just do it the regular way. Click OK to open it up. You see you're at the administrator view. By default, you'll be here, at least on a 32-bit system. I'm going to change the directory to Snort, change it again to Snort bin, where Snort lives. We can quickly check the version with Snort V. That tells us, look, 297.2 is installed. That's great. The other thing I need to know is what interface am I going to use. Many computers these days have 2 or 3 or even more interfaces, and you need to make sure that Snort is paying attention to the right one. We do that with the command Snort W. It's going to return all available interfaces. Now on my computer, I warn you, I have 6. That's a little bit more than usual. If you don't, that's because I have a virtual machine server running, but most people will not have that. You probably have 2 or 3, though. It's important to pick the right one. If you're playing with Snort for the first time and you have wired, meaning Ethernet and wireless, you might want to disable all but one adapter so you can make sure the traffic is flowing the right way. I know that the adapter or I need is number 5, and that's how I'm going to run Snort. You may not have 5, so you should not put a number 5 in your startup command the way that I'm going to. You might need a 2 or a 3 instead. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is test Snort. Specifically, I'm going to test the configuration file that we just edited. So the command to run Snort is just Snort. You do a dash lowercase I to designate the interface. I'm going to put a 5 there. You do a dash lowercase c to indicate you're designating a configuration file. That is in Snort, etc, snort.configure. And I'm going to put a dash capital T because all I'm doing is testing the configuration file right now. I don't want to do anything else. So it's going to run for a few seconds. It's going to make it all the way through. It just gave us a warning that it didn't find any white or blacklist entries. That's because those files were empty. So it said, hey, we're not going to use the reputation preprocessor because you don't have anything set for them. We get some flowbits warnings, which you can ignore. We're waiting for the product to fully load, and we'll either get a message that there's an error, or we'll get a message that the configuration file was successfully validated. And it says successfully validated the configuration Snort exiting. So that's great. So now what I want to do is I want to see if Snort will actually work and generate an alert. And to do that, I am going to I'm going to add a couple of rules to the local.rules file. I could try to cause one of these other many rules that are in Snort to fire, but it's just easier for testing purposes to put one in that I know is going to fire. So you don't need to know a lot about rule writing to make a test rule. You have to say where things are coming from. That's external network. Any IP address, any port is what that means. Left out the... You can do ICMP, you can do TCP, you can do UDP, or you can do all of them together with IP. I'm just doing a simple testing rule here for to use a ping or a trace route or an ICMP program like that. I'm going to make a message. This is what will show up on the screen. Testing ICMP. Going to give it a signature ID because it needs one. There's a lot of rules already. They go up into 5 or even 6 digits. So most people, when they write their own rules, they start with a 7-digit number. That way you'll never run into a conflict. And that's a rule. Now there's 3 different types of traffic, so we can make 3 different testing rules. We can do one for UDP, which on most home networks will generate lots of traffic without you trying to do anything at all. It'll just fire away with a lot of things for your ARP traffic or your SSDP traffic. Do one more for TCP. can limit this one to port 80 because it's web traffic. And now, if you're testing, if you open up a browser or something, that'll probably fire. So here are my 3 rules. They're just testing rules. They should produce a lot of alerts because they're not looking for anything special. They're just looking for different protocols moving all across the network. So I'm going to save that rule. It's going to get loaded automatically by Snort because it's included in snort.config. I'm going to run the same command again, but I'm going to add a -A console, which means whatever happens with Snort, it's going to spit it out to the screen right here in my command shell so I can see it. So now it's going to fire up again, just like it did when we were testing. It's loading up all the rules. Tells us how many it loaded. We're getting the same flow bits warnings we got last time. What you're looking for when Snort runs is the phrase or the words commencing packet processing. That lets you know that Snort has just started to fire. You may not be able to see it here because there will probably be some UDP alerts generated almost as soon as Snort starts running. So it may scroll right off the screen. There it was very briefly. So there's all my UDP traffic that's generating things. Now, remember, I have a web browser open in the background, so if I go and I refresh this and I go back over here, you'll see some TCP traffic as well. There's so many alerts being generated you can barely see it. Or you can try something else about that. If you wanted to, you could open up another command shell and issue a ping or something like that, and it would give you an ICMP alert. There's a couple in there. So if we want to terminate this and stop it, we just press Control-C. We can look back at the summary. Tells you how many different kinds of processes. Even in the few seconds I was running there, which was not very long and I wasn't doing very much, I got almost 1,000 packets. So good news is we know Snort's running, and now I can go in and make some more tailored, more customized rules, or enable some other kinds of things to work with what I've got. And that's pretty much all there is to it to get Snort to run on Windows.